In 2002, this laptop sold for around $1,900. Adjusted for inflation, in 2026, that's over $3,500. Today, I bought it for $50, shipping included. According to Toshiba's own original documentation, this laptop couldn't play DOS game in native mode with Sound Blaster audio. And back then, they were absolutely right. More than 20 years later, somebody changed the rules. The question isn't whether this works. The question is, should you buy one? If you're new here, welcome. Most people today play DOS game with DOSBox, and honestly, that's what I'd recommend for most people. This channel explores something a little different. I'm on a mission to find forgotten computers that can still deliver an authentic DOS experience, preferably without paying collector prices. Some turn out to be hidden gems, others deserve to stay forgotten. Today, we are going to find out which category this Toshiba belongs to. Before I buy any computer for DOS gaming, I always go through the same checklist. For this laptop, one of the first things I'm looking at is the chipset. This laptop uses Intel's ICH4 southbridge. If you've been following the DOS community, you already know why that caught my attention. If not, don't worry, we'll get there in a minute. Next, the NVIDIA GeForce 4 Go. It offers strong DOS compatibility, 3D acceleration, and hardware full-screen stretching. And finally, the price. I paid mine around $50, shipping included. That's less than many people spend replacing a battery in a ThinkPad. On paper, this machine checks a lot of boxes. Before we continue, here's a feature that instantly dates this laptop. Even with the computer turned off, it could play an audio CD. Back in 2002, when carrying a wallet full of CDs was completely normal, this was genuinely useful. No Windows, no boot time, just press play. A small detail, but a very cool one. Now let's boot into DOS, starting with Doom. No music, no sound effects, just silence. Let's try Wing Commander. Again, nothing. Prince of Persia, only PC speaker beeps. And Quake, still nothing. At this point, it doesn't matter whether the game is old or new. Without additional software, this laptop has no Sound Blaster audio in native DOS. And that's exactly what Toshiba told customers over 20 years ago. Sound Blaster Pro compatible in DOSBox only. In other words, it works under Windows, but in native DOS, you're on your own. Most DOS games don't search your computer looking for audio hardware. They expect to find a Sound Blaster at a known address, usually something like port 220. And on a classic DOS PC, there really is hardware there waiting to answer. But this Toshiba doesn't have one. It uses an AC'97 audio system instead. The AC'97 codec doesn't emulate a Sound Blaster or generate the game's music and sound effects. It's essentially the final stage of the audio chain, taking finished digital audio and converting it into the analog signal that reaches the speaker or headphone jack. Under Windows, the operating system and audio driver provide the software interface applications use to reach that hardware. In native DOS, that Windows stack isn't there. The game sends its Sound Blaster commands, but nobody answers, and the AC'97 codec keeps waiting for audio that never arrives, at least until one small program changes everything. Before we go any further, like almost every old laptop, at some point the CMOS battery will need attention. Toshiba didn't make it particularly easy. You have to open most of the machine and remove the motherboard to reach it. The battery is rechargeable and soldered onto the board. Fortunately, it's not the kind that is too prone to leakage, so if yours is still healthy and you're not comfortable with board level work, I wouldn't tear the machine apart just to replace it. If you do go in, take pictures, keep the screws organized, and don't rush. If you are shopping for one online, pay very close attention to the hard drive bay. Most buyers know how to look for the IDE caddy, but there's another part that's even easier to miss. This model also requires an IDE interface interposer. The drive does not plug directly into a standard 44-pin IDE connector. The interposer adapts the drive to the motherboard. Without it, you can't install a drive. So before buying one, make sure the listing includes both IDE Caddy and IDE Interposer. That little adapter can be much harder to replace than the laptop itself. A quick thought: no matter how much care we put into restoring these machines, we cannot reverse time. Plastic becomes brittle, LCD panels slowly lose their brightness, and eventually components reach the end of their life. But with some care, we can give these machines a second chance and keep one more computer out of a landfill. Let's get back to our sound problem and type a few commands before trying the exact same games again. Same laptop, same DOS installation, same games, just a few commands, and suddenly we have Sound Blaster audio. When this machine was new, Toshiba told us Sound Blaster compatibility was for the Windows DOSBox. Today we are doing it in native DOS, and it almost looks easy. So what just happened? The DOS game still believes it's communicating with genuine Sound Blaster. SBEMU intercepts those commands, emulates the Sound Blaster in software, and sends the resulting audio through the laptop's AC'97 hardware. From the game's point of view, the Sound Blaster is still there. That's the simplified explanation. If you're new to DOS, that's all you need to follow the rest of this review. And if you're a DOS veteran, keep an eye on the tech notes. I'll show you the actual configuration as we go. DOS wasn't frozen in time. It evolved over many years. Earlier games run entirely in real mode. They operate very close to the original PC architecture, with direct hardware access but very limited memory space. More demanding games increasingly use protected mode, usually through a DOS extender, that gave them access to much more memory and a more capable 32-bit environment. Why does this matter? To support both, SBEMU needs a few additional pieces. GemX replaces the traditional HiMem and EMN386. QPI-EMU adds the port trapping needed for real DOS games, while HDP-MI32 handles the protected mode side. SetBlaster tells games which Sound Blaster settings to expect, and finally, SBEMU provides the emulation. When SBEMU starts, you actually see where the real mode and protected mode support are active. There's one complication though. Windows 98 requires HiMem.sys and doesn't support HDP-MI32. Rather than rewriting the startup files every time, I use DOS built-in startup menu capability. A simple reboot and I can choose in which configuration I want to work with. There is also a specialized version called VSBHDASF that adds software wavetable capability to play in-game music using recorded samples stored in a sound font. And all of this is happening in software. Setup is basically three things. Point it to a sound font, initialize the HDPMI port trapping, set the MPU 401 address, and finally, you can run VSBHDASF. There is one limitation. It supports only protected mode. I did try using hardware wavetable for the real mode games. This is a Surdaco DreamBlaster S2P, which connects a MIDI module through the parallel port, while Soft MPU detected it. And I did try every parallel port mode available on this Toshiba, but I couldn't get any audio from it. If you've successfully used an S2P on a similar machine, let me know in the comments. Sound isn't the only problem with this Pentium 4. We have several performance problems. One of them being legacy USB. On this Toshiba, the BIOS servicing USB in the background can noticeably bog the system. If performance looks wrong, I'd check this first, unfortunately at the expense of having to use the trackpad only. Also, for clock-sensitive games, it is too fast. The challenge is slowing this thing down. I'm using P4 tools to reduce the Pentium's 4 effective speed. It doesn't turn this into a real 386 or 486, but it gives us several useful slowdown steps. One important note, P4 tools works with GemX, not with HighMem.sys. So here we have test drive 3 again. While it is slowed down, I still couldn't eliminate some stuttering, and that's one of the main limitations. Throttling is not always smooth. Some early games work well, some require compromises, others never feel quite right. If your priority is late 80s and very early 90s DOS gaming, I'd choose an older machine with native DOS sound and better throttling. This Toshiba is much stronger later in the DOS era. In Quake 3D, for example, one useful optimization is write combining through the FASTVID utility. In my case, it roughly tripled 3D performance and is one of the first tweaks I'd enable. DOS is only half of the story. This Toshiba also makes a surprisingly capable Windows 98 gaming laptop. And one quick reminder from our multiboot setup, boot with HighMem.sys and don't load HDP-MI32. Getting the right drivers working took some detective work, but the community has already solved most of it. With a 3D Mark score of over 3700 at 1024x768, though modest, this Toshiba becomes much more than a DOS experiment. Entry to mid-level Windows 98 3D gaming becomes possible on the same inexpensive machine. That's exactly the kind of versatility I'm looking for.
Roger that.
The Era Map makes this machine's strengths pretty clear. Early DOS can be hit or miss. By the mid-90s, things get much better, and late DOS through Windows 98 is where this Toshiba really belongs. Benchmarks tell us how fast a computer is. The Era Map tells us what it's actually good at. And that brings us to the retro tax, which measures how much collector demand is affecting what you're paying. And right now, Pentium 4 laptops are still mostly overlooked. You're giving up early DOS compatibility, but getting a lot of capability for little money. With an RB score of 3.2, this laptop is far from perfect. But with a relatively low price, and thanks to projects like SBEMU, hardware that once had no practical native DOS Sound Blaster support can now do things it was never designed to do. That's what makes this computer interesting. If your library leans towards the mid to late 90s and you want Windows 98 on the same unit, this Toshiba deserves a place on your shortlist. If you found this useful, consider subscribing. There are plenty more forgotten computers out there, and we are going to find out which ones are still worth bringing back. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.